What's up, Bassketeers? Josh here, and today is the beginning of a really fun series on improvising and soloing. I'm going to try to give you some things to think about that will freshen up your playing, help get you out of a creative rut, give you some new sounds to play with, all in a relatively simple improvisational context where all you need to know is a G Dorian scale. We're going to be using that for this whole series. Okay, so whether you're comfortable in a 1-octave range or 2-octave range or the whole fingerboard is going to be okay. I'm going to be moving pretty freely around the fingerboard, but you can adapt this to just stay within a little scale box, which is one of the improv exercises I talk about in my book, Electric Bass Scales and Arpeggios. Here's the groove we're going to be jamming over in this whole improv series. Just a very simple kind of G minor to B flat major vamp. G Dorian's going to work great over the whole thing. So what we're going to focus on today is intervals, using musical intervals that you don't normally use in your playing to make it more interesting. Let me try to demonstrate kind of the problem that happens when people don't focus on this. Okay, so I'm just going to solo a little bit. Okay, so hopefully that's enough. So is there anything you noticed about that solo that came up consistently as you were listening? For me, what I noticed, because I very intentionally did it, is that it felt kind of stuck in a register. Like I did move down the bass at some point, but it changed register very slowly. And the reason for that is that I was only using small musical intervals between notes. Interval just meaning the distance between two notes. So through all the notes I played in that single note line, from one note to the neighboring note on either side was never more than probably 4 half steps, which is a major third. So it was all steps, whole steps and half steps, and thirds, major and minor probably in a mix. So this is an issue that I see come up a lot with soloists who are struggling, which often tends to be us bass players because we spend all that time learning to play bass and not learning how to shred. So when you learn scales, you play them stepwise, right? It's always whole and half steps. And when you practice arpeggios, then you practice it, I don't know what happened there. You practice them in thirds, right? So you're used to playing steps and thirds with your scales and arpeggios, so it's easy to only use those small intervals when you're soloing. However, it can get kind of stale. Like if you heard me do that for another minute, you just start to get really bored. Whereas if I allow myself to play intervals more freely, I can make it engaging for a much longer period and just more engaging in the time I have. So what I'm going to do now, let's just take a little tour through some different intervals. Let's start with some fourths. Fourths are an interval. And when I talk about intervals in this video, I'm always going to be talking about diatonic intervals, okay? So it's not just going to be chromatically going up a perfect fourth from whatever note. It's going to be going up a fourth in the scale, which really means skipping ahead 3 notes in the scale. So from a G, which is the root, C would be a diatonic fourth away from G, D would be a diatonic fourth from A, but then a diatonic fourth from the third of the scale, B flat, is actually going to be an augmented fourth because we're going up to E natural, which is the 6th of the scale. Okay, that makes sense? So diatonic intervals, a little bit different than talking about specific chromatic intervals. So I'll just play with this a little bit and then I'll give you some space to try it out yourself. So I'm just going to be focusing on fourths. I'm still allowed to use other intervals, but I'm just trying to get myself to use an interval that maybe I wouldn't normally use in my improvising. Improvising is a word I know how to say. Okay. Okay, so that changed the sound of my soloing a lot by focusing on fourths. It becomes a lot more angular and maybe a little bit more disjointed. There's a lot of, our ears are expecting the seconds and the thirds a lot more. So that really changes it. If you go back to the first solo and then go to this solo, I think you can hear a pretty distinct difference. You play with that a little bit now. So again, just G Dorian. Play whatever you want. Rhythm is not important for this lesson. We'll get to that in another video. And just try incorporating some fourths into your playing. Go ahead. And if you found one spot where you can do it, try to find another place in the scale where you can jump a fourth from the note you're on. See if you can make a melodic phrase around that. A few more bars. Cool, okay, we'll stop you there. Okay, so that's fourths. We're not gonna go through every interval, but I encourage you to do that. Let's go to sixths. I really like putting sixths in my playing, and it's something that I think a lot of my students would probably benefit from too. This is something you can hear in a lot of different musical contexts. And one way you can think of sixths is as inverted thirds. So for example, from G to B flat, which is the root to the third of the scale we're using, is a third. But if I take that G up an octave, then I've got a much wider gap from the B flat up to the high G, which has now become a sixth. So minor third becomes major sixth. So that's a cool little thing. So rather than playing a line built around thirds, I can just flip it around and then I get a wider interval gap. I'll jam with sixths a little bit so you can maybe hear what I'm talking about. Okay, so other intervals were in there, but a lot of sixths. So you can hear now there's more opportunities for the line to kind of jump up, pop back down, or just quickly change register, incorporating a wider interval like that. So again, we're talking diatonic sixths here. So it's going to be a mix of major and minor sixths depending on where you are in the scale. Try jamming over this some more and incorporate some sixths in what you're doing. You're allowed to use other intervals unless you really want to restrict yourself to sixths, but that's pretty confining. So just see if you can find 1/6 somewhere in the scale, like maybe from the third up to the octave, or from the fifth up to the third in the next octave. And see if you can come up with some melodic ideas around that. I'll give you 8 more bars. Couple more seconds. To summarize what we learned in this video, most beginning to intermediate soloists tend to focus on smaller intervals like steps and thirds, and you might benefit and find some new juice in your playing by experimenting with some wider intervals: fourths, fifths, sixths, sevenths, octaves, ninths, tenths. The sky's not the limit. The end of your bass neck is the limit. But wide intervals can contribute a lot to a good solo line. If you were to transcribe one of your favorite solos, you would probably find a mix of small intervals and wide intervals in there. So by thinking about intervals, this is one way that you can make more interesting note choices when you're improvising. In the next videos in this series, we'll focus on some non-harmony specific elements, more around rhythm and articulation and some other stuff. Some other angles you can approach your soloing from to sound better. So hopefully you enjoyed this. If you'd like to support my channel, you can check out my Patreon page and support me there. You can also buy my books at joshfossgreen.com. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you got a lot out of this, and I will see you soon.